Coming up next, you'll have an opportunity to meet Dr. Arlene Wright, who is a highly credentialed nurse practitioner from the state of Florida, who provides a clinical role and an educational role for her nurse practitioner students and is well versed in some of the legal issues and controversies around NP practice. Arlene, can you tell our viewer what were some of the topics that we covered in your podcast?
So thank you, Pat. So the topics that we covered, we're going to talk a little bit about the nurse practitioner role and actually the various roles of advanced practice, as well as the credentialing, because unfortunately there's not one size doesn't fit all. There's many hats that nurse practitioners wear. We'll also talk about the various practice settings where you can find nurse practitioners, just due to the evolving healthcare change in our country today, and the need for primary care as well as other services. We'll also talk about some red flags that you might see in documentation, as well as the concept of going bare that we see here in the state of Florida, where physicians do not have to carry malpractice insurance, leaving the nurse practitioner sometimes with somewhat of a target on their back. We also going to touch upon some situations that were not so pretty, some fraudulent things that impacted nursing programs and can impact our profession as well. So we look forward to this and many other topics as well.
Be sure to come back to Legal Nurse Podcast to hear Dr. Arlene Wright share her concepts, share her knowledge on that list of topics that she just so nicely recited without notes, and you'll get inspired and educated on this role. See you at the next Legal Nurse Podcast.